If everybody come to order, please. This is our May 4th Bowling Green Warren County Planning Commission meeting. McKenna, if you would call the roll, please.
Commissioner Gay.
Ma'am.
Commissioner Graham.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Shaw.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes.
Commissioner Vitale.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert.
Yes, ma'am.
And Chair Warren.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioners, you have the minutes of our April 20th meeting in your packets. Are there any questions? Would call for a motion, please.
Move.
Second.
Commissioner Gay.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Shaw.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes.
Commissioner Vitale.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert.
Yes, ma'am.
And Chair Warren.
Yes, ma'am. Is there any old business tonight, Mr. Peterson? All right, thank you. Hamp, if you would call our staff in for our public hearing, please.
Thank you, Warren. I request that you order that the record tonight include all of the relevant statutory and regulatory provisions that govern tonight's decisions. I'd ask that the Commission's entire file for each application on tonight's docket be included in the record, along with the qualifications of each staff witness. And finally, if you would please administer the oath to each of those witnesses.
Y'all swear to tell the truth? Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Our first public hearing tonight is 2023-28ZBG Beech Holdings, LLC, care of Patrick Reynolds and Kelly Coleman, has filed an application to rezone tracts of land containing approximately 5.93 acres located at 110, 150, and 180 Center Street, 0, 112, 134, and 140 College Street, 0 East 2nd Avenue, and 301 East Riverview Drive from light industrial to PUD plan unit development with the general development plan. Sir?
Thank you, Chair Warren. We had a pre-application meeting back in October for the properties you just outlined. They're bound by East Riverview Drive, and then you can see Center Street on the north and East 2nd running down the west side, and then an alley here. College Street runs through the middle of the development here. And as you mentioned, the current zoning is light industrial. And there are a mixture of current land uses, including commercial, industrial, and vacant. And then the future land use map is mixed-use residential. The applicants are actually, they're going to have to explain this. They'll do a lot better job than I can. But there's two items on the docket this evening, and they actually go together. They're in different locations, but they tie together. I'll let them explain that here in just a minute. But I'm going to jump to the concept plan that's on here for the downtown segment. So this is the concept plan, that's the existing map. Here's the concept. And so in looking at the proposal, they are proposing to incorporate a mixture of uses to include retail, a bar, restaurant space, a distillery and tasting space, rooftop terrace, multifamily residential housing, live work space, and then various courtyard areas and green space. And so in our review, we found that the proposal complies with many of the criteria assessed in our review process. And so pending the public hearing testimony and discussion of a few of the items on page 1, our recommendation for this application is for approval. But there are a few things I'm going to touch on, starting on page 2 of your staff report, referencing the building location. The submitted concept plans, as you can see, depict the buildings pulled up to the front property lines along the public rights-of-way and public streets, with parking mostly internal to the development and located behind the proposed structures. Staff suggested that the applicants include considerations for the location of buildings. However, this was not addressed. And then looking at the natural features at the bottom in relation to the tree canopy, the existing trees will have to be removed to accommodate the development, and staff suggested that the applicants incorporate a tree planting requirement. The concept plans that were submitted include a greater amount of landscaping than the minimum required by the ordinance, but the applicants only agreed to abide by the minimum landscaping requirements. And then on page 3, looking at the minimum building height, the TIF design guidelines encourage a minimum building height of 2 stories. Other newly zoned properties in the TIF have also imposed a minimum height requirement of 2 stories, and staff suggested that the applicants include a similar requirement, but they instead committed to a minimum building height of 2 stories or 15 feet. Touching on building orientation, buildings in the downtown area and the TIF are oriented to face public streets. Staff suggested that the proposed buildings be oriented to face the existing public streets or be designed in such a way to appear to face the public streets, but the applicants agreed that the buildings would face public streets or internal open areas. And then last, touching on open space, in the PUD standards, the applicants are proposing to follow the central business development standards for lot coverage, which would typically allow 100% lot coverage. The applicants did commit to a minimum of 5% open space. However, this is less than the amount of open space that is depicted on their concept plan. So those are our items for discussion this evening, but again, our recommendation is for approval pending discussion of those items. That is all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Rachel. I think we've got a couple issues to talk about. Commissioners, any questions from Ms. Hurt's report? All right, hearing none, thank you very much. Is the applicant or the representative here?
Evening, Chair Warren, Chris Davenport, 921 College Street, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
I'm always happy to be in front of this board and present developments. Not all developments are the same. Some are quite a bit different than others. This is a very different one. And as I told Mr. Coleman and Mr. Reynolds, who with me here tonight, someday I look forward to driving downtown and maybe pointing out to my kids that I was involved with that a little bit, because this is a really unique, different type of development that's being proposed that I think could be, frankly, a trendsetter for the downtown area and really be something to bring some life down here. I do want to make, before I speak further about this, I do want to address one DPC that Rachel mentioned, and that is number 4. And we can get rid of in DPC 4 or 15 feet. The reason that was included is the developer's intentions are to make their best efforts to include the existing Bohannon Tobacco Warehouse as a part of this project. They want to remodel that. In fact, there's a DPC that mentions that to make efforts to do that. One of those facades is somewhere between 15 and 20 feet. And so we want to make sure that if we reuse that, we don't run afoul of a condition that requires 2 stories, which could be considered higher than that. But the inclusion of new should address that concern. So, and I think the preservation and the utilization of that space was one of the things that the staff encouraged the developers to do here. They intended to do it anyways. So, in the report, and I know Rachel's shown you one concept, there are actually 2 conceptual concepts that have been drafted by the architecture firm in Nashville that's involved in this site. That's, I believe what you're looking at is the low-rise concept. There's another concept here. Correct. Here, yeah, it's here. So here's the mid-rise concept. And I mean, obviously, as the name entails, the principal difference is the height of some of the structures. This is probably the first time I've been involved in an application where staff wanted a minimum height restriction, not a maximum. You know, typically we're here talking about whether buildings are going to be taller than X. We wanted to make sure that the minimum was in place here, given the central business and the TIF guidelines. So you've got 2 different concepts, and the point I want to make here is the fact that there are 2 concepts being discussed by the developers are really what's driving these other points. I don't want to be very upfront about that. So one of the points that Rachel mentioned was the TIF suggests, some of the guidelines in the TIF suggest orienting buildings to the public streets. The reason we haven't done that exactly, what we've offered is that the buildings will either be oriented to public streets or open interior spaces. is because that's what's predicted in these concepts. And the fact is, this site is roughly 1.5 city blocks, which I think is atypical from most development requests. And then for that reason, it allows for a more open concept in the interior of the property. So that is the desire, and that's why the DPC is written the way it is. The other things she mentioned there, building orientation, building location. Frankly, we don't want to nail them down too much at this stage because they're picking between these different concepts. So I have difficulty on their behalf stating with any more specificity what size buildings will go where or where certain landscaping will go. Obviously, the concepts are, Rachel has mentioned the concept shows landscaping above and beyond the ordinance. I think that's their every bit intent, but I have a hard time drafting a more particular condition when they're working on these different concepts. That really, from 30,000 feet, explains or addresses all those points that she brought up. So use-wise, we've eliminated some of those CB uses. I'll tell you that the hope is the uses that we'll see down there will range from hotel to restaurant to brewery. There is an intention of having an outfitter that will rent kayaks that will connect this site to the other site that we'll hear in a little bit. That's a more rural site, this being obviously a more urban setting, a downtown setting. So it is a really, I think, neat and different idea and project. And like I said, I'm really happy that I've been involved in it to this point. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Davenport?
Yeah, I really don't have an issue with the landscaping. I think, the amount of money that's gonna be spent on a project like this, I think you gotta give a little latitude that you gotta get done and see where it's best suited. This is not something that's, that I think you can say you've gotta have X amount. I think about the money that will go into a project like this, they will do everything they have to and can to make sure the landscaping looks good.
I would agree completely. Let me ask it this way, Chris. Here's really what we're trying to protect is zoning this project for some reason comes unwound, and now we've got a project. We've got a lot of property that's zoned kind of wide open. Is it in your estimation, is this about as tight as we can get it and still hit both of these concepts?
I really think it is. Now, that being said, there are defaults in the ordinance, and Rachel mentioned that. There is a landscaping default for central business. Mm-hmm. And in this PUD, we're committed to that. There's a few other things here. I believe we got a DPC that commits us to review by the TIF design board. So there are some fail-safes involved, and I get it. When I have in the past represented opposition, I've encouraged this board to say those DPCs are what you can bank on, and you can't bank on promises and that kind of thing. But again, there are those fallbacks. Even the landscaping has a minimum in the ordinance. The open space has a minimum in the ordinance. Of course, we've gone a little bit more than that. Not much, I'll concede.
So is 5% the minimum in the ordinance?
0% in the ordinance.
For open space?
For central business.
Got it, okay.
But if you include parking, you still have to provide landscaping for your parking. But in theory, if you had an entire block and it was just building footprint wall to wall, that would be permitted under the central business.
I agree
zone.
with Christian. This is a great looking concept, and I would love to see this be built here in Bowling Green. From a staff, this is more of a question for staff. In your view, even if this deal did come unwound, have we got enough here to be able to get a good get a good project if this one for some reason went south? We're kind of torn between these two concepts and then making sure that we protect it adequately.
Yeah, so generally with PUDs, the concept plan is what they're tied into doing. Now there's some flexibility in that as far as we understand that there's no engineering at this point, and
Right.
they still have to figure all that out, so a building might shift or that sort of thing. But I guess our concern, where we had the point to consider about the building orientation and the building location and the parking location, is just to, I guess, ensure that the concepts are generally followed, in that you wouldn't have a building central to the block with just a sea of parking surrounding it. Or that your building facades, when they are pulled up, like I understand in one of the concepts, there are some buildings that, I think it's the first concept, where there are some residential units that are kind of facing internal to the site, but they're in general central to the site, and you would never see those from the right of way necessarily. So I think that was our main concern as far as that goes. I don't know, Ben, do you have anything else to add?
Two things maybe. One, I think she expressed that correctly. So with what we don't want in the TIF district or downtown is the possibility of a rear building facing this, the rear of a building facing the street, or parking around the street side, because that's not the character of downtown. And I don't think that's at all the intent of these developers, but this potentially leaves that open to that if it were to fall apart. Which leads me to my other point, and this is more of an idea, again, may not be a good one, but we do have a reversion clause, a possibility to revert the zoning. We might ask them if we decided to go that route. So if the development falls through and they decide not to go through with the development, we could revert that zone back to the existing zoning. But I would want to ask them what's a reasonable period of time to consider something like that. I think it's up to 2 years in the ordinance, but I would be hesitant to do that without asking them that question if that was a possibility.
Mr. Davenport, did you hear Ben's comments?
Yeah, I did, Chair Warren. I think the last comment was maybe like a sunset provision, that if, and I don't know what triggers a sunset, the lack of a building permit typically, or? Typically so. Okay. And that's a discussion I can have with them. I will say that, notwithstanding that, when you look at the conditions, and what's being hypothesized is that Beech Holdings and Mr. Coleman and Mr. Reynolds abandon this project, and they sell this to somebody else. And then those people, those buyers, buy this block and a half under this PUD with these restrictions. And again, I guess I'll just say, the restrictions there are restrictions here. Uses that aren't allowed, the necessity to refurbish the Bohannon warehouse and utilize that, the necessity that any plans, any structure would have to get reviewed and get approved by that TIF design board. All those would still be in place. Those things would not go away. And so then that buyer would still have to work within those parameters.
I guess that's the other thing that doesn't give me much heartburn on the orientation of the buildings. The TIF's gonna have to approve it.
Would the TIF prohibit this rear orientation that you're referring to? Don't know.
I mean, Ben, when you're talking about that, I mean, to me, you're trying to prevent us having another parking garage we're staring at.
Not necessarily, because
Or-
that's
or parking
eventually
facing-
well, that's eventually going to be wrapped, and
One day.
that's finally
Yeah.
hopefully coming
10, 12
closer
years
than
later,
and
yeah.
further away.
Okay.
Somewhat yes, and then I guess maybe my perception of the TIF district and TIF design review board is not been super consistent over the years for a variety of reasons, but the authority is still there for them to review that.
I mean, for me, I mean, the TIF board is gonna have the ultimate say. And so if they come to the TIF board with a concept that's just way out there, way out of whack, it's up to them to say, no, you can't do that.
And I will offer, initially, when I filed this application, that condition was not included, I believe. That was one of the comments that the staff made back to me in the preliminary stage of wanting the developer to get committed to that TIF design. Because they would not have been my understanding is without that condition.
So Chris, you said that you could have a conversation with your client. If we did some sort of sunset provision here, we're golden. We got it nailed down, and there are no issues here.
Have that conversation.
Already in the ordinance. So, I don't know that we would do that. Yeah.
I think 2 years is fair.
The 31st, 2025.
Yeah.
I will say, 2 years goes quicker than you think, when you're working on plans. I mean, listen, I mean, it's.
I'm comfortable giving them.
I mean,
But however,
yeah, I mean, on a scale of this isn't something that's gonna be
I'd
turned
be
over.
comfortable with 5. You're right, 2 years goes fast.
Goes fast.
Especially market changes a little bit or something, and then you have to wait until the economy's better.
I think 5 years is too long. I would say 3 years, and that then gives us,
Does it start once the building permits are pulled?
from tonight.
Starts as of tonight?
Starts whatever date you establish, but what I
Right, it would start.
scribbled out here is that if this development does not result in the issuance of a building permit by December 31st, 2025, 2026, whatever you pick, then the owner appoints the planning commission staff to apply for a reversion of the zoning to light industry.
So, Chris, did you hear that? So,
I did, but I think I'm gonna suggest another way to attack this.
okay.
What I suggested to my clients was maybe a reversion in the event of a transfer of ownership. And the rub there is if they sell a piece of it, right? So I think it's gotta be secondary, it's gotta be either, I will say this, if we approve, if down the road there's a development plan that's submitted and that's approved, would that not alleviate the concerns that we're expressing today?
But does that put them in a spot that, say somebody comes along 6 months from now and offers them an incredible amount of money, then all of a sudden the ownership's gonna change, and then you got to come right back here?
I'm suggesting there's a few conditions. One, if that development plan is approved, I think this argument becomes moot.
Development.
Well, my understanding is even before building permits, will there not be additional,
Will the TIF review process?
well, I mean, a site plan,
So, the ordinance, it's specific for PUDs, not just zone changes in general, and it just says within 2 years of approval of the PUD by the appropriate legislative body, unless an extension is granted by the planning commission, the applicant shall submit a site development plan for review by the CDR committee. So it's not even tied to a permit, it's just that you would start the process within 2 years of site plan approval through CDR, but then it also says unless extended by the planning commission, so.
I kinda like Ham's, December 31st, 2026.
That gives them plenty of time. I mean, that's 3 years, 3.5 years from now. Yeah, excuse me.
I'd say 20.
They've obviously put a lot of thought into
Ben,
it
would you,
with these
Ben, would you come to
concepts.
the microphone, please?
Given that, I don't know that we would have to do anything. It's just more, the thought was being more of the awareness that reversion is a possibility, both to the board, but also the applicant, if they don't abide by this. So if we're comfortable with what's in the ordinance and on the books and have made them
Yeah.
aware, then I don't know that we need anything extra in this case.
let me share with y'all some of the concerns my clients have. This is a very ambitious project, and one thing they want to do, they're not committed to do it in the DPC because of the cost of it, but they're trying to get financing and trying to get assistance in burying utilities on a 1.5 city blocks. That's an extreme undertaking, because the concept of this idea, overhead utilities, just doesn't jive with it. And that is just the type of it causes them heartburn in setting that year. Even though 3 years sounds like a super long time,
I
that's the
agree.
problem.
3 years is not that long of a time.
What Mr. Peterson said was let the zoning ordinance
Stand.
address these concerns.
Okay.
And
And the zoning ordinance is going to require them to turn in a development plan within 2 years anyway, correct?
Or
All
get
right.
an extension.
I'm okay
Or
with
ask
that.
for an extension.
I'm okay with that.
And if they sell it within the 2 years, the purchaser is gonna have the same obligation.
Stand in the shoes.
Yeah.
I think I'm good with that.
Staff, any other comments? Y'all are huddling up. That's fine.
Okay, sorry. I think we figured this out. I think we're okay just moving forward as is, knowing that the reversion clause is in the ordinance. And if for some reason along the way we feel that, you know, if the applicants sell it to someone else altogether and this is no longer the plan, or we feel that it's a dramatic difference from what you all reviewed tonight within that 2-year period outlined in the ordinance, or an extension, yeah, we could come back to you all and you could weigh in on a potential reversion if we thought that was necessary. But I think for now, just move forward as planned if you all are comfortable with that.
Okay. So we've heard, I think everybody's in agreement of what has been presented by the applicant and by staff. Commissioners, are there any other questions regarding what has been presented here?
I mean, Dean, before you call for the motion, I think you probably need to swear in on number 4, where we took the 15 feet out.
Yeah, we made a change there.
Thank you. Christian?
In the room, and I don't,
Yeah,
make sure we don't have some opposition before we.
we will. We're
Wrap
just,
up.
so
Mr. Reynolds can swear to the change.
name and address, please.
Patrick Reynolds, 751 Old Richardsville Road.
Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Patrick, did you hear that change I made in the height, that no new structure will be less than 2 stories?
Yes, I
We
agree.
took out the 15-foot reference. You good with it? You good with
Yes.
that?
All right, thank you, sir. All right, Commissioners, before we go to the audience, are there any other questions of the applicants and or their representative?
I don't have, first I want to say that I think it's a very progressive project, one that has a lot of economic development amenities to it for this city. Want to compliment the developers on coming up with such a progressive plan. I did have a couple of questions. One, the Bohannon building, it's not a historic, does it have historical significance in any way?
I think the staff report kind of, I would read it as saying it probably does.
Okay.
And that's one reason, plus it's cool looking and it's going to hopefully work in with the plans. The reason why that DPC says if it's reasonable
Right.
is we don't have engineering work yet to see how much of that building is viable versus not.
Structurally.
Okay. The other question, does the applicant have an idea of what might go in that Bohannon building as far as services? If you can speak on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, Commissioner Starks, it's in, I think, so there's a rendering of an idea how that space might be utilized. I think conceptually, they're talking about brewery, distillery space,
Okay,
obviously a commercial.
okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Commissioners, any other questions? All right, you've heard the applicant's request. Is there anyone in the audience tonight has a question or an opposition to this request? Okay. Hearing none, Commissioners would call for a motion, please.
I make the motion to approve the proposed zoning map amendment together with and condition upon the general development plan docket number 2023-28ZBG. Based on the testimony and documents presented in this public hearing, the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan as demonstrated by its compliances with the objectives and action items presented at the staff report. Therefore, the proposed zoning map amendment is in agreement with the adopted comprehensive plan. Further, I request this motion include the summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this hearing.
Second.
Commissioner Volkert,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Gay,
Ma'am.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Shaw,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Starks,
Yes.
Commissioner Vitale, and Chair Warren.
Yes, ma'am. The motion is approved and will go to the Bowling Green City Commission for final approval. Our next item tonight is 2023-29Z BGCO, Beech Holdings, LLC, care of Patrick Reynolds and Kelly Coleman, has filed an application to rezone tracts of land containing approximately 15.49 acres located at 102 Old Richardsville Road and 1965 Kentucky Highway 185 from Ag and RM4 multifamily residential to PUD planned unit development with general development plan.
Thank you, sir. We also had a pre-app for this property in October, same day. And looking at the summary of request, for this property, this area includes a mixture of uses to include recreational activities, entertainment, a campground, a restaurant and bar space, amphitheater, and overnight accommodations. And the current zoning is Ag and RM4, and you can see a large portion of the area to be considered is in the floodplain. The current use is Ag and public institutional, and the future land use map is mixed use residential and also open space parks and recreation. And so let me jump back to the concept for this site. Maybe. I thought it was at the end. Oh, there we go. Nope. I'm almost there. There we go. Okay. In reviewing the request, staff found that the proposal complies with the majority of the criteria assessed in the review process and that it was generally compatible with the surrounding area. Our recommendation is for approval, pending the public hearing testimony and discussion of a few items. The first, looking at the natural features at the bottom of page 2. If we go back, well, I would say we would go back to the area view, but that's going to take a minute. So you can still see the trees and everything on this concept underneath the plan here. And so there are mature trees running along the southwest and northern property lines. And the site is bordered by the Barren River. You can see that at the top of the concept. Tree line depths range from roughly 100 to 200 feet along the Barren River. The concept plan depicts these trees being preserved in addition to a greater amount of landscaping than what is required by the ordinance. And the applicants only, however, committed to the minimum landscaping requirements in the ordinance and to preserving trees within 10 feet of the property lines. And then touching on the surrounding land uses, it's on page 12 of your staff report. Again, just for the sake of not going back a bunch of slides to get to the land use map, but you can see that the surrounding area is mainly agricultural or single family. And so with the proximity of some of the single family residential uses to this development, the staff suggested that the applicants consider restricting days or hours of operation for the outdoor recreation and entertainment uses and the proposed major event venue, and this was not addressed by the applicants. But those are the couple of discussion points we wanted to touch on. But other than that, I am finished with the staff report and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Commissioners, any questions?
I just make the same comment about the landscaping. I think we got to give it a little latitude. I think they will try to preserve as much as they can, and like I said, the amount of money they're going to spend, they're going to do everything as they can.
Agree. Rachel, what is the proximity of this site to, say, Beach Bend? I see.
You can actually see, I think on one of the maps, maybe.
See Garvin Lane, is that Beach Bend?
Let's see, it would be,
Go out to it.
it's off the view. It'd be east on the map. But Garvin Lane, you're right. It's in proximity. I mean, I don't know how many miles, like maybe a mile as the crow flies.
Okay.
Not terribly far.
I'm just thinking about the venues that would be hosted at Beach Bend as compared to this. This does have an amphitheater, which does make us consider that there may be some sort of outdoor entertainment, and but I can't imagine this being anywhere near as loud as Beach Bend. So your comment about the timing and
Yeah, it was just more so that there wouldn't be an event at 2 a.m. or something like that was I guess the purpose of our suggestion regarding the days and hours of operation for some events that could be more of a noise generating use.
Now, let's assume for a moment that there's an outdoor concert or something. are decibel levels a concern that need to be addressed here, or or not? No? Okay. All right, very good. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions for Ms. Hurd? All right. Mr. Davenport, any other comments or questions? Or comments or?
I want to try to address the hours. Mr. Gaines Penn is here. He lives across the street. He and I had a conversation earlier this evening when we came in about this. He's obviously interested in the hours of operation. Talked to my clients about that. So what I'm going to propose is that hours of operation shall end 10 p.m. on weekdays, 1 a.m. on weekends, or during special events, and that will exclude the overnight accommodations on the site, including the lodge and the campgrounds. The reason being, obviously, if you've got an overnight accommodation, technically that's going all night because people are on your property, but that should address the events.
So weekday is Sunday night, Thursday night, and weekend is Friday and Saturday.
Correct. And then there is 1 a.m. for special events on the rare off occasion that occurs. I think that's in some of the other wedding barns and facilities I've done, those times seem to be pretty typical as I recall, so.
Development plan condition, or?
I think it probably needs to be a new one, Hamp. I don't think there's one that it probably fits in very well. Let's make it 15.
We'll say hours of operation shall be limited to.
10 p.m. on weekdays, 1 a.m. on weekends and special events, excluding overnight accommodations, including campsites and lodge.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Davenport? Before we call your clients to this, to agree to this, is there anyone in the audience tonight has opposition to these questions? Mr. Penn?
Highway 185. I appreciate their accommodation on that issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Penn. Anyone else in the audience tonight has a question or opposition to this request? Mr. Davenport, if you would call your client up to agree to the amendments.
He's still sworn in?
Yes. Mr. Reynolds, do you agree to, Hamp, if you would read those and if you would agree to them, sir?
Sure. Mr. Reynolds, do you agree to a new development plan condition, Roman 15, which says that the hours of operation shall be limited to no later than 10 p.m. on Sunday through Thursday, 1 a.m. on Friday and Saturday, 1 a.m. for special events, and excluded from those hours of operation shall be the overnight accommodations.
Including the lodge and the campsites.
Agree.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
Live close by? You'll help police it, won't you?
Okay, Commissioners, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Davenport. We call for a motion, please.
Make a motion to approve the proposed zoning map amendment together with and condition upon a general development plan docket number 2023-29 ZBG County. Based upon the testimony and document presented in this public hearing, the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan as demonstrated by its compliance with objective and action items presented in the staff report. Therefore, the proposed zoning map amendment is in agreement with adopted comprehensive plan. Further request that this motion include a summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this public hearing.
Second.
Commissioner Gay?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Shaw?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Starks?
Yes.
Commissioner Vitale? Commissioner Volker?
Yes, ma'am.
And Chair Warren?
Yes, ma'am. The motion is approved, and will go to the Bowling Green City Commission and Warren County Fiscal Court for final approval. That is our last item tonight, and we have no new business, and we will go into closed session in just a minute.
Personnel Committee.
Personnel Committee, closed session.